Classical Tamil poetry operates on a rigid mathematical logic. Every syllable functions like a machined block, snapping into a precise structural grid that governs the composition. The core of this system is an engineering concept called Thalai. In Tamil, the word literally translates to tie, or to bind together. In practice, Thalai is the absolute rule governing the connection between words. It dictates whether the terminal edge of one metrical foot is legally allowed to attach to the leading edge of the next. We are going to reverse engineer the 7 distinct classifications of Thalai. These 7 categories act as the logic gates for all Tamil poetic meter. Thalai is the invisible architecture running beneath the text. It forces completely disparate words to fuse into an unbroken, highly predictable auditory rhythm. To understand how these joints work, we first have to look at where the calculation happens. A linkage is evaluated exclusively at the boundary, the exact point where the tail end of word 1 meets the front end of word 2. The text provides precise terminology for this interface. The initial word is the nindrasir, the standing word. The attaching word is the vadamsir, the coming word. This linkage operates on a strict binary. The connection will result in a state of Andrathal, which means a perfect match, where the metric properties of the 2 edges are identical, or it results in Andramai. This is a calculated mismatch, where an opposing metric state is forced at the boundary to create a staggered yet stable lock. Notice what isn't included in this calculation. The interior syllables and the total length of the second word do not matter. The algorithm only cares about the immediate points of contact. We can see this binary in action by examining the first major classification, Asiriya Thalai. This specific joint utilizes the Andrathal, or matching algorithm.
This page from our source text defines Asiriya Thalai. Looking at the example Kalvi and Katrar, we see the raw metric breakdown beneath the text. This is Niron Asiriya Thalai. The standing word ends in a nair syllable, connecting directly to a coming word beginning with nair. To expose this matching connection, we drop the consonant at the boundary, revealing the true nair-to-nair linkage. This seamless joint creates an uninterrupted rolling momentum. This mathematical output directly produces the flowing narrative cadence required by the Asiriya Ba poetic form. If Asiriya Thalai requires agreement, then delay represents the structural inversion. It is an algorithm built heavily on Undramai, or mismatching. This section outlines Venchir Vendelay using Yameya Kandavatre. The rule demands forced opposition. If the standing word ends in a ma, computationally a nair, the coming word must begin with a nirai. A nair terminal must meet a nirai initial. On the left, the matching rule allows blocks to slide together seamlessly. On the right, the offset blocks of Vendelai must lock together in an intentional stagger. By forcing syllables to mismatch, Vendelai acts as a rhythmic break. It produces the highly controlled, marching staccato cadence that defines the Venba meter. Any rigid structural system will experience errors. When an invalid linkage is attempted, it results in Thalai Tatutal, a mechanical rejection of the joint. The top paragraph here defines Thalai Tatutal as a critical grammatical error. In strict forms like Venba, the stakes are absolute. A single linkage failure completely invalidates the entire poem. There is zero tolerance for deviation. However, the system includes built-in patches for phonological edgedixes. One is I gara kurikam, the phonemic shortening of the I vowel. By compressing its length, a syllable that looks like it should trigger a rejection mathematically passes the test as a short vowel. There is an even more complex grammatical patch involving the special character itham, represented by 3 dots. This page examines an apparent failure in the famous Thiru Kural, at the boundary between the words Nirthal and Akthoravan. The parser is given an explicit instruction to resolve this. To maintain the mathematical validity of the joint, the itham cannot be treated as a vowel.
It must be processed exactly like a standard silent consonant. This requires a process called Atru Niki Alagidal, the mandatory stripping of consonants. We must visually cross out the consonants to extract the pure metric weight underneath. When poetry appears to fail, it's rarely a mistake. It is a signal to apply phonological exceptions, revealing the perfect underlying structural compliance. Now that we understand the micro rules governing individual joints, we can run the full algorithm across a complete sequence of text. This section provides a multi-word parsing exercise, beginning with the sequence Tanda mi mugan tanil. Parsing happens in 3 rapid steps. First, we dissect the raw letters into metric units, breaking down into ner nire, meaning nire nire. Second, these group into formal seers, kuvilam and karuvilam. Finally, we check the exact linkage point where nire meets nire to verify the joint is mathematically valid. The system scales perfectly. Moving to the Kodi Purai block, we can process the words, extract the base Asai layer, and lock them into the seer layer in rapid succession across the entire line. The act of alagaduthal, parsing the meter, is not an exercise in literary interpretation. It is a rigorous compiler check designed to validate the poem's source code against the Thalai algorithm. When we map every possible combination, we arrive at a comprehensive matrix of 7 classifications. This flowchart traces the exact pathways from any given standing word through the matching or mismatching rules to its final calculated Thalai. This matrix of rules defines the structural boundaries for every major classical Tamil poetic form, generating the distinct cadences of Asirya-pa, Venpa, Kalipa, and Vanchipa. Composing here required poets to act as linguistic engineers. They calculated precise phonetic weights on the fly, balancing semantic meaning against absolute structural compliance. Thalai proves classical Tamil prosody is a fundamentally deterministic system. The phonetic reality of every single syllable directly dictates the structural architecture of the poem. Now that we understand the micro rules governing individual joints, we can run the full algorithm across a complete sequence of text. This section provides a complex multi-word parsing exercise, beginning with the sequence Tanda mi mugan danil. Parsing happens in 3 rapid steps. First, we dissect the raw letters into their base metric units, the assay. We can see the sequence broken down into ner nerai, meaning nerai nerai. Second, those individual assay units are grouped to form formal seers, or metrical feet. Ner nerai translates to kuvalar, and nerai nerai to karavilam. Finally, we test the joint. By checking the exact linkage point where the nerai of the first word meets the nerai of the second, we verify that this specific type of Thalai is mathematically valid. The system scales perfectly. Moving to the Kodi Purai block, we can process the words, extract the base Asai layer, and lock them into the seer layer in rapid succession across the entire line. The act of alagiduthal, parsing the meter, is not an exercise in literary interpretation. It is a rigorous compiler check designed to validate the poem's source code against the Thalai algorithm. When we map every possible combination, we arrive at a comprehensive matrix of 7 classifications. This flowchart traces the exact pathways from any given standing word through the matching or mismatching rules to its final calculated Thalai. This single matrix of rules defines the structural boundaries for every major classical Tamil poetic form, generating the distinct cadences of Asiniyappa, Venpa, Kalipa, and Vanchipa. Composing within this framework required poets to operate as linguistic engineers. They calculated precise phonetic weights and linkage offsets on the fly, balancing semantic meaning against absolute structural compliance. Thalai proves classical Tamil prosody is a fundamentally deterministic system. The phonetic reality of every syllable directly dictates the structural architecture of the poem.